Raise your hand if you can, because I'm going along. As you're told, I'm in the Office of Ag Water Policy within the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. I am the Deputy Director for Policy and Planning, and I have a group that basically has two primary responsibilities, and that is water supply planning and basic management action plans, total maximum daily loads, and other water quality considerations. And as you'll see, my remarks today and some of the challenges for agriculture that I talk about are related to those responsibilities. We have quantity challenges and quality. On the quantity side, certainly these are not the only challenges, but looking forward to primary ones I see is areas in which the resource is already limited and there is potentially future ag demand, and the position of agriculture vis-a-vis those competing demands for those particularly traditional water supplies that are available. And I will illustrate that with an example as I go through. In areas where we have less competition for water use, but we are facing issues related to meeting future ag demand while avoiding impacts to the resource. Those would be both quantity and quality impacts. And again, I will talk about an example of that. And then in the area of water quality, the main issues and a lot of the focus of what we work on today relate to basic management action plans, and both it's kind of twofold. Our initial responsibility in those areas is to make sure that all agricultural producers enroll in the BMP program and fully implement the BMPs that they enroll in. And then secondly, in many cases, 100% BMP implementation is not going to achieve the nutrient reductions that are necessary to get the TMDRs within basic management action plans. And that will be a second area. And real briefly, I'm going to talk about the water supply stuff first. And I realize I have this throughout the presentation and don't have it identified anywhere, but when you see FSAID, that is the Florida statewide agricultural irrigation demand. We are in our 5th year of that. In 2013, the legislature assigned us responsibility for estimating future ag demands for use in regional water supply plans, and FSAID is the product. And very briefly, because I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about FSAID, I'm using a lot of the numbers, but two people here that if you're interested will be good to talk to, Valerie Seidel and Dan Dorte, who are with the Balmoral Group, and they have been under contract with us since the beginning on the FSAID project. And another person, just real briefly too, on my staff, who is our point person on basic management action plans, is Jacinia Escobar. And if you have any more detailed questions about the maps, that's your girl. Person, excuse me. So I'd like to start off just kind of an overview. This is the statewide picture, and as you'll note here, there are some really distinct differences in different parts of the state in terms of what we're projecting in terms of, and this is irrigated agricultural acreage, and you'll see as I go along that that's an important distinction that I will make as we talk about this. The reason I say that is that traditionally in water supply planning, the sort of driver has typically been agricultural acreage rather than irrigated acreage. And in some cases, ag acreage was essentially kind of the leftovers after development occurred. So in a lot of planning in the past, we've seen ag demands flat or even declining. And what we've been doing, rather than using either ag acreage or irrigated, we use that proportion of ag acreage, and I'll give you some examples of this, as driving that long-term trend. We base that on 25 years of data going back to 1987. If my math is correct. Anyway, from the ag census, and just some examples. The percent of irrigated acreage overall for the state is about 24%, but among the districts, that percentage ranges from a low of about 8% in Northwest Florida to a high of about 35% in South Florida. And I'm going to be talking about Suwannee quite a bit as I go along. And one of the things that we've seen in Suwannee is this very dramatic increase in the percent of ag lands that are irrigated. And just as kind of accompaniment to the, to the increases in irrigated acreage, this shows you the increases in demand again. Certainly Suwannee stands out. We have that 40% increase in irrigated acreage and a 49% increase in demand. In some cases, even where we see declines in irrigated acreage, we are still projecting increases in demand, largely due to increases in intensity. And we're seeing a lot of that statewide. We're seeing it particularly in Suwannee in terms of some of the new ag that's coming in. Now I'll talk about CFWI just a little bit. CFWI is kind of one of the examples of where, just in broad strokes, here's the situation in the Central Florida Water Initiative. Current water use is estimated to be about 800 million gallons a day. The projected need over the next 20 years for that region is about 1.1 billion, leaving about a 250 million gallon a day kind of gap that we have to close over the next 20 years. It's been estimated that there's about an additional 50 MGD of groundwater available. That may require some management measures, I think is the term that we've been using on that, but just, basically we need more water than we have in that area. And so I want to focus a little bit on a particular county within the CFWI. These are the overall ag demands, and that's relatively flat across this planning period. But I do want to talk particularly about Osceola County. And the reason for that is what I'm showing you here is the green are the overall agricultural acres in Osceola County. The purple are those that are irrigated today. Sorry, I did bang that, I won't do it again. So there is clearly potential in this area for additional agricultural acreage. I guess the other thing that I would point out is a lot of the population in Osceola County is up in this northwest corner. So there is certainly the potential in this area for additional irrigated agriculture, which we are not projecting at this time, based on the history of this area. But one thing I want to share with you, last year, the North Ranch sector plan was approved in this area. And in the little table at the bottom, what I'm showing you there are the projected demands for Osceola County. And then in the second row are the demands associated with that North Ranch sector plan. And as you can see, by 2040, the demands associated with that would double what we were previously estimating for this area. And I think kind of nicely illustrating when you have an area like this with the amount of ag lands that are still there non-irrigated, that there is potential there. And clearly, the issue here is we think there's another 50 million gallons a day available in this area. Take that 30, it's about 60% of what we're talking about there. Okay, now I'm going to return to Suwannee a little bit. And again, this is the entire Suwannee River Water Management District. A lot of agricultural land in this district, and interestingly enough, one of the districts that has one of the lower percentages of irrigated ag. In fact, as late as 2012 in the ag census for this area, the percent of ag lands that were irrigated was less than 10%. In our latest work for this area, that percentage is now 16%, and we project that by 2040, something like 20% of the ag acreage in this area will be irrigated. And This is clearly an area where those challenges associated with protecting the resource, I think, are going to come to the fore. Already in the 2010 water supply assessment that the district did, up in this northeast corner of the district, a number of areas were identified either where they were projecting an existing MFL to be exceeded within the planning period, or what at the time was an interim MFL to also be exceeded. And those areas became part of what is known as the North Florida Water Supply Plan, which is a partnership between Suwannee and St. John's, where they've developed. This was the second kind of cross-district regional water supply plan. The first was CFWI, and North Florida was the second. And I did want to share with you just a little bit of detail about what is happening with agriculture. And it was very interesting to me earlier to hear some of the things about fresh vegetable markets, import, exports, and what's going on up there. Because the thing that we've been seeing in Suwannee, and we project this to increase into the future, is a very large expansion of fresh vegetable production. We're seeing things that, like carrots and beets and broccoli and onions that were not traditional crops in this area of the state, but are becoming increasingly cultivated in that area. And to show you the sort of accompanying demand with that acreage, you'll note the fresh vegetable demand more than tripled over the planning period. Okay, I think. Yeah, and here I'm just, this is the average year demand, and then also just accompanying that, showing you the dry year demand as well. And as you can see again, in that fresh vegetable category is a large proportion of that expansion. And I did want to say a little bit about the kind of the history of what's occurred up there. The last time the Suwannee district did a water supply assessment was in 2010. And what I'm showing you here is the red, which was the Suwannee's low estimate, the yellow is the high estimate, and the green is the latest projections that we did, which was last year. And so you'll note in 2015, the sort of high projection from the district was still greater than what we were projecting, but as you can see, by 2030, what we are projecting actually exceeds what was considered in 2010 the high demand in that area. And in part, this reflects, again, getting back to that expansion that's been occurring up in Suwannee that was not entirely anticipated. We've seen a lot of production that's come in from California and Georgia particularly, and we expect to see a continuation in that. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit now about the basin management action plans. The primary role of agriculture in a BMAP is that if you are an agricultural non-point source, you're required to do one of two things. You either implement the BMPs that we have developed and adopted by rule, or you monitor water quality. Second important distinction, if you implement BMPs, there's a presumption of water quality associated with that implementation. If you are doing water quality monitoring, it's not simply that you have to do monitoring. You have to demonstrate that you're not causing or contributing to a violation of state water quality standards. So it's obviously the first choice is the better choice for ag, and part of what our office is working on is trying to achieve 100% BMP implementation within these BMAP areas. And what I'm sharing with you here is the percent that we have enrolled. And a couple of these stand out. I mean, some of the ones that we've been working on for a longer period of time. Lake Okeechobee, which really, Lake Okeechobee goes back to 2000 with the passage of the Lake Okeechobee Protection Act. And 18 years later, we have about 8% of the acreage enrolled in that area. And again, I would emphasize that it's not simply enrolling, but as was sort of, legislature kind of emphasized this in the 2016 legislation when we were directed to develop an implementation verification program. it's not simply enrolling in the program. It's now a specific responsibility of ours to verify that in fact that the BMPs that a producer has enrolled to implement are in fact being implemented. And I want to talk about one particular BMAP because it really presents some fairly unique challenges. This is the area of the Suwannee River Basin Management Action Plan. As of the end of December, out of about 360,000 acres of agricultural lands within that BMAP, we had about 109 enrolled. So obviously a continuing challenge to complete that enrollment within this area and also to ensure that the BMPs are being implemented. And here's the challenge. The current estimated load to groundwater is about 9.7 pounds of nitrogen per year. And of that total, about 8.2 million is from agriculture. The reduction in that load that's needed to meet the TMDL is about 4 million pounds of nitrogen per year. Another thing that happened in the 2016 legislation is part of that act was the Florida Springs Protection Act, and within that act, it designated that BMAPs for, there were class of springs identified, there were first order springs and some others that were added, and they're now considered outstanding Florida springs. And BMAPs for those springs must have milestones established in the BMAP to achieve the TMDL within 20 years. And the way DEP has kind of laid this out is that 30% reduction in 5 years, an additional 50% in 10 years, and then the final 20% in 15 years. And the reason it's 15 years is it gives a 5-year lag period once you achieve that 100% reduction in load to actually begin to see the impacts of that. Okay, so as I said, there's a required reduction of 4 million pounds. One thing that DEP does in the BMAPs is they look at all existing and planned projects and calculate the reductions that will be achieved based on those. In the case of the Suwannee BMAP, it's about 2.1 million pounds of nitrogen per year. Of that, about 2 million pounds are associated with ag projects, and included in those ag projects is 100% BMP implementation that will result in a reduction of about 1.1 million pounds of nitrogen per year. One of the interesting things that happened in this BMAP, we were collaborating with DEP. We were asked to provide the percent reductions that would result from 100% BMP implementation. We did a fairly extensive literature review, and the numbers that we came up with were for farm fertilizer, the loads would be reduced by 30%, for livestock waste by 20%. DEP took the same sources that, in fact, we did. I mean, we communicated with DEP, we provided the literature that we had reviewed, and DEP decided that no, it wasn't really 30 for farm fertilizer, it's actually 15 and 10 for livestock waste. So there's a bit of a disagreement. I mean, obviously, if you go back to 30 and 20, you're going to see that 1.1 million increase to about 2.2 million, and really get us further along in the process. But what we have agreed is that we need a great deal more research on the percent reductions resulting from BMPs, and we have made that an emphasis of research that we're sponsoring. And as time goes by, we would hope to see the reductions achieved by BMPs to increase. Oh yeah, and the other interesting thing, if you think back to my remarks about the ag demands in this area, we're also seeing a substantial increase in agriculture. DEP has estimated that each year that will result in an additional 14,500 pounds, which, do the math real quick, that's another 290,000 pounds of nitrogen per year. Part of our work with DEP, we worked on, based on our analysis of the various types of agriculture being conducted in that area, and what was possible in terms of the various practices that you see listed on the left. We came up with additional estimates for what we might be able to achieve And I would emphasize this represents for each of these practices that they are implemented on 100% of the ag lands on which they would be, that you had those opportunities. So we consider it a planning level estimate. We think ultimately there needs to be a lot more detailed feasibility analysis of these numbers, but that is essentially where we are with this one now.
Thank you, Rick. Very good.